Welcome to a new episode of Brainy Bunch TV. Today, Dr. Penny Pullan will inspire you to get the most out of virtual and hybrid work in teams. She is author of the best-selling book, Virtual Leadership, that I totally admired and adored last year when I read it, and I'm very happy that she will, that she's with us today. Dr. Pullan, you've been working with international virtual teams since 9/11. How did you experience the sudden change to working virtually at the time?
Well, it was a bit of a shock. I was really excited because I'd just been given my first ever program to run, a program of projects that was going to be happening all around the world for my employer at the time, Mars Incorporated. We were due to spend a week or two in a kickoff meeting in New York, and it was oh so exciting. My bags were packed. I had my ticket, no online boarding cards at that time. I was all ready to go, but the date on my ticket was the 13th of September 2001. What could possibly go wrong? Well, of course, 2 days before, the absolute tragedy of 9/11 happened, and aeroplanes were grounded. We were not allowed to travel within Mars, I think, for about 3 months. But the program had to go ahead. So all of a sudden, my program shifted from being one that we were going to meet up, we were going to get to know each other, and then everyone was going to go back to their own countries to run the project in their own countries, and I would coordinate it. Instead, we never actually got to meet. We had to do everything virtually, getting to know each other, working out how everything would fit together, understanding the benefits around the world, everything that you'd normally do together. Certainly in around the year 2000, we had to do it virtually. And it was a little bit like being a baby thrown into the deep end of a swimming pool to see if it would sink or swim. It certainly felt like that. I've got to do this thing. It's my very first program and I have to do it virtually. How am I going to do that? But yeah, luckily I swam. I found that I enjoyed virtual working. I'd also just been trained quite deeply in facilitation and group dynamics. That was very much focusing on people in a room together. But because I'd just done that training and was really thinking carefully about how people worked and interacted, I could apply the same thinking to how people would work and interact virtually. And I found that facilitation was really the core. This training I'd had and the tools I had and the thinking around different perspectives and putting yourself in everybody's different shoes really helped me to develop the whole virtual leadership style that I talk about a lot nowadays.
Okay, and if you compare it to the sudden change that we have experienced recently, what stands out for you?
Well, I think for me it was a huge change, but it was really just a few people who were affected, those who would need to do business travel by air. Whereas this recent sudden change, there are a lot of echoes of that, but it's much more global. It's quite funny. A year ago, if I was talking about virtual leadership, I had to have a slide to explain what virtual was. If I was speaking to my parents' generation, none of them knew what virtual leadership was. In fact, I tended to get teased a lot because they'd say, especially my dad, they'd say things like, virtual? That means not really, not quite proper. So virtual leadership is not really leadership at all. Whereas now, if I have a chat to any of them, they say, oh yeah, I get what you do now.
And then what is effective virtual leadership?
Well, that's interesting. It's very much around leading yourself and others to be effective in this virtual and now hybrid world. I have a model for virtual leadership which is in the book, and it's a concentric circles model. Everything I develop model-wise seem to be concentric circles and at the center there is self. So you can't become a better virtual leader until you've really made the decision to step up yourself and to be as good as you can be virtually, but also to know yourself. What are your own preferences for all sorts of things like communications? Do you prefer telephone or instant message or whatever? But lots of preferences around different things in a virtual team. What are your own biases as far as you can uncover those? A lot of biases are unconscious completely. What are your own strengths that you can use, and what are your weaknesses that you will need others to cover for you? All those things. What's your own leadership mindset? Because that's incredibly important. And there are effective leadership mindsets for virtual, and there are ones that don't really work at all. And a lot of people are discovering that at the moment. So that's just the core, the self part. The next layer, once you've begun to do that work on yourself, is to look at the others around you and to think about, and to ask them and to talk and discuss with them, what are their strengths that you can use? What are their weaknesses that you or other team members will need to cover? What are their preferences in terms of communication and ways of working? All these sort of things. And how do you build that trust and rapport? And the book goes into things like, working on those intangible identities, the ways we can connect with other people and build that trust. And trust is the basis of getting people to go into action. So it's really important. The next layer out on this virtual leadership model is actually there are three facets here. And this is where technology comes in. People are quite surprised because they think technology is really the core of what we're doing. But actually it's not. It's only an enabler, a little bit like electricity in a house is an enabler. Once you've got it installed and it works, you forget about it, but you use it to make your house a home. So technology, how to use it, that's something on that third layer, if you like. But also working effectively within meetings, so live virtual sessions, but also thinking about the different time working, asynchronous working, how we can work together effectively with collaboration tools when we can't be together at the same time. And that's something that a lot of people forgot in the rush to suddenly go virtual. Lots of people are just in live virtual meetings almost all day, which is not the way to do it.
Yeah, how can they change that way, that modus operandi?
Oh, just of sitting on video calls all day?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, stop. Really think carefully about what are the bits of work that we need to do best when we're together live.
And what could they be?
Things like a lot of people are doing a daily check-in. Doesn't have to be very long, just to check in with everybody. How are you? Where are you? What do you need from the rest of us today to be able to do your best job today? You don't need to sit in front of the video all day. Probably a short daily check-in, maybe even 30 minutes, might be enough. Things where you need to generate ideas together and bounce off each other, that's helpful to be together for making decisions, or perhaps for finalizing those decisions. And meetings where you need the richness of communication. If you need to share bad news, for example, maybe don't do that with a whole team, but one-to-one video calls are very helpful. Checking in with staff. Use the phone, perhaps, if that works best for both of you, or check in one-to-one. You don't have to do everything with everybody in the team sitting in front of the video. That's not necessary, and it's actually counterproductive. I was speaking yesterday to a neuroscientist who has been looking at how we're working. She's fascinated by it, but also appalled. And she was saying that the level of concentration that you need on video calls, when you have to, like I'm doing at the moment, I'm looking straight in the camera, but I can't look straight into your eyes. So it's hard work doing that. It takes extra concentration. She says it's similar to the level of concentration that somebody who's partially deaf would need to be able to be concentrating all the time and interpreting the words. So it does take extra concentration, and it is tiring.
Yeah.
Also, some people find the reflection of themselves coming back at themselves very disconcerting. You
Yeah.
wouldn't want to sit in a meeting in a room with a big mirror in front of you. So something that you can do that's really effective and that I'm thinking of doing right now is actually taking a little bit of post-it note and covering up my image. So there we go. Ta-da! Bye-bye, Penny.
Okay, don't cover up the camera though.
No, no, no.
But there is people are hesitant to change the way they work with video conferencing. So for instance, to take out the knowledge transfer out of the meeting and send them a video message or a voice message ahead of the meeting so people can listen to it in their own time. What makes it so hard for leaders to change that way of working, would you say?
Most of it's habit. The nice thing about this shift is that staying as you were is not an option. The worry, though, is that people get stuck with what they were doing in the first few weeks of lockdown and they just stick with that. Instead, ask yourself, what's going well? What should I keep doing? Ask yourself and your team as well, what's going well? What should we keep doing? And also ask yourself, what do I wish was different? What could we tweak to make it a little bit better? And if you ask that after every meeting and end of every day and end of every week, you will get better little by little. And those small percentage improvements will build up over time.
And one of the questions that our viewers posed was, as a leader who comes to an existing team, what are the first things you could do?
So if you come to an existing team and you or some of the people in the team are remote, you need to be very careful not just to jump straight in to thinking, what are the goals that we need to achieve? Who's going to do what? Which is something that, especially if you're under pressure, a lot of leaders will focus straight on. But you need to really form that team, even if it's existing. If there's a new member, even if the only new member is you do need to go through the stages of forming that team. So make sure that everybody understands the reason why they're in that team, what they bring to that team, and then make sure that everybody understands what everybody else brings to the team. Yes, so what are the special things that everybody is bringing, and make sure everybody knows that and everybody's place in the team. So then you can go forward and clarify your goals and work out who's going to do what and gain commitment to actually get the work done.
And can you do that virtually?
Absolutely. It may mean that you need to do more one-to-one meetings rather than trying to do the whole thing as a whole team, but getting to know each other. You can do that one-to-one. You can do some of that, as you said, perhaps you could video some introductions and telling your story. Using narrative is really important.
In virtual work, I noticed that it is also difficult to organize like an informal exchange of thought or spontaneous meetings, especially for people who won't be able to go to the office. What can you do to get a level playing field for people in your team?
Yeah, and that you've got the crux of it there, Jovienne. The level playing field is absolutely critical, because if you don't have that level playing field and the people in the office have an advantage up here, then the remote people get more and more disadvantaged over time as the people who are in the office actually get to work together with the full richness of being in person. So actually you need to make sure you create that level playing field. You need to force it, which may mean that when you have meetings in a hybrid team, that actually you decide that everybody's going to join from their desk, from their laptops like this, rather than having some people in a room discussing with each other and being able to share the richness and the nuances of conversation when you're in person, and the remote people gradually feeling a little bit left out and missing half the meeting.
How do you organize the informal exchange of thought and unexpected meetings?
So one of the things that people are doing is to have those sort of daily stand-up meetings or daily catch-up meetings by video, arrange in time one-to-one as well. Perhaps have slots in your diary where you're able to be open to be contacted and people can just give you a ring. And other slots, and this is for everybody in the team, other slots that are dedicated to actually getting work done. That's useful as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. In your book, you write about how hard it is to spot and solve conflict virtually. What makes it so hard?
Obviously, video helps a little bit. But if you were in a room, you would be able to tell if somebody was silent. You'd be able to tell if they were silent because they were falling asleep or because they were furious or whatever. When people are in little tiny squares on a video, it's not as obvious. And you don't see people in between meetings, whereas a glance around the office, you can see from somebody's body language if they are feeling uncomfortable or unhappy or cross about something. So by being virtual, we don't get to see the signs of conflict that we would naturally pick up if we were all in the office. So just spotting conflict is hard. So it's helpful to just bear in mind that this is hard and keep a bit of an eye out for conflict. It may well be there. Don't assume that everybody's silent because they're just very happy with what you say. That's probably not true.
And then if you know that there are people in your group with opposing positions, how do you incite them to work together when they can only meet online?
Okay, opposing positions, you see, opposing positions, it may well be that they're very happy to listen to each other. They have different positions, but they're very happy to present their case and listen to everybody else, get a full picture, and then come to a conclusion as a group. So that's great, especially if it's around the task you're doing or the process you're going to follow. Then you can certainly do that quite well in a facilitated virtual session or workshop. If you have people who have relationship conflict, where they're two people who just can't stand each other, then I think that if possible, put them on different projects as opposed to forcing them to work together. I think that's true even when you're face to face, but especially virtually, don't build in problems that don't have to exist.
Okay, another question I received was of someone who wrote, my team and I, we wish to work more on a project-based approach, and we would like to start this, even though we are now working almost fully online. What are the do's and don'ts?
First question I'd have is, do you really need to do it right now in the middle of a pandemic? Perhaps you could just run projects, but leave other things the same for the moment. If you want to do a massive organizational change, I'd say probably not the best time right now. I think that a lot of people are working quite close to their limits, and with this general backdrop of a little bit of fear, perhaps we're all getting used to it, but there is this level of stress that's a little bit higher than usual. So if you are going to make changes, do it very carefully. The other thing that you need a lot of when you're doing things in virtual and hybrid teams is clarity. You need to be incredibly clear and consistent in your messaging. You need to know precisely who's going to do what exactly each of the projects are, how any organizational change will all fit together so that it's completely clear and unambiguous for everybody.
And that's a challenge.
That is a challenge. There are lots of C words coming out here. Clarity, collaboration, consistency, challenges, courage even. Perhaps you need to have the courage not to jump into the unknown, but perhaps to say, we're going to work with projects, but we're not going to change everybody's reporting links and so on in the middle of this.
You talk about clarity, but how do you know that people really understood one another?
Well, that's interesting, because unless you check in with them or ask them, you don't, do you? So perhaps that's what is a good idea. Check in with people, check for understanding, find out what people have understood and if you've given them something to do, check with them what exactly are you going to be doing now, and explain that you want to make sure that what you've said has actually made sense to them and that it's landed properly.
Thank you. You are writing a new book.
I am. And you're one of the beta readers, so thank you so much for that, Jovian.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, you're one of the beta readers for my new book. Thank you so much for that. You've already sent some comments in.
Yeah.
And having a whole tribe of people who are eagerly anticipating the next chapter is really helping me to get going with that.
Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry.
No, it's lovely, because
you do like it.
The book's in me. It's just this whole sort of book birthing, whole load of work. And I'm quite an extrovert, and if I know there are lots of people and they're really keen to see it, then I will get down and do the work. There's just so much happening at the moment. I'm sure you can imagine there are lots of people interested in virtual and hybrid leadership. So there's a lot happening, but I also need to get this book out. So thank you for helping.
Yeah. And what will your book be about?
The book's title is Making Workshops Work, but the subtitle is the bit that I really like, which is Creative Collaboration for Our Time. I wanted to put it the other way around, but the book specialist said no. The publisher said no, it needs to be really clear what it is. We'll have it. Making Workshops Work needs to be the main title. And creative collaboration, and for our time, in a time like this when everything's changed, is just so spot on.
And do you have any final words for our viewers?
Whew, final words. Be kind. Remember, everybody out there is a human being. If we want to work well in virtual and hybrid and even in-person ways, then thinking and asking about their perspective and thinking about how everything is landing with people and how everybody's dealing with this situation, which is stressful, and it's ongoing stress at the moment in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. But also it's a chance to change. It's a chance to make working better, to get the best out of people. And I think that effective virtual and hybrid leadership can be the lasting legacy of our lockdowns. That's my wish.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pullan. Mocht je nou zelf willen ervaren hoe je interactieve teambijeenkomsten kunt leiden, doe dan mee aan de workshop die Brainy Bunch organiseert voor de abonnee-sponsor nieuwsbrief. Op 11 september van 10 tot 11 kun je meedoen. En schrijf je in op de nieuwsbrief, dan ontvang je begin september de uitnodiging en de link en kun je je inschrijven. Oké, hopelijk tot dan.